Welcome back to Total Performance Living, and today it's part 3 of my 5-part series giving you an insight into some of the key principles that I teach people in my upcoming Total Performance Principles program, which kicks off again next week. And today we're going to have a look at the third pillar of Total Performance Living, which is lifestyle. And particularly within that pillar of lifestyle, we're going to look at stress, one of the biggest issues and challenges for people as they look to optimize their health, well-being and performance is how do they manage their stress. The stats tell us now that up to 90% of doctors' visits are stress related for people. So we have a stress crisis. We have an epidemic of people not being able to manage stress, understand how it works, and manage it within their lives. So let me take you through a key framework that I use with people and teach in the program that allows people to do just that. Manage stress and make it work for you, not against you. So let's have a look further. Here you'll see a model that I use with people, which I call the stress bucket management tool. So to talk you through what's here, we have up the top here, the 6 different types of stresses that everyone is going to encounter and accumulate within their lives. We have physical stress, chemical stress, electromagnetic stress, psychic stress, so mental, emotional stress, nutrition stress, eating too much, eating too little, eating the wrong foods, getting chemicals, etc., and thermal stress, which effectively just refers to your body's necessity to remain at a constant temperature, therefore it has to work hard internally to do that. So if we're too cold, it has to heat us up. If we're too hot, it has to cool us down. So the key takeaway with this is that these stresses are constantly flowing into our life. They're inevitable. And in fact, we want to be able to learn to use them for the good and minimize their negative effects to leverage that stress response in our life. Here you have these stresses pouring into what I call the stress bucket, which can be thought of as ourselves. That's the proxy for us as a human. We are this bucket that's having this stress continuously poured into us on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis. Now, what's happening with that stress as it's coming in is we have this accumulation. The water is building and building and building. So this stress that we're experiencing all the time is building up throughout this bucket, and if we don't find ways for it to flow out, the bucket overflows, i.e. we get ill, i.e. we get injured, i.e. our performance diminishes. So what we need to do is 3 things with managing stress. First of all, we need to understand the inputs and we need to manage the inputs. So we're regulating the stress that's coming into the body. We're regulating how much we're getting of each of these different types of stresses, what stresses we're getting, and how we're actually managing them on a day-to-day basis. So the first part is about the inputs, what's coming into the system and how we manage that. The second part is around the container itself, i.e. ourselves. How do we create a body that's able to better manage and be more resilient to stress, i.e. how do we improve the container? How do we make the container bigger? How do we make it more sturdy? How do we make it able to manage that stress better? More sturdy, more resilient, and a bigger container. That's what we're looking for. And then the third critical part with stress management is we know the stress is going to continue coming in. It's an inevitable part of life. We know that it's going to build up to some degree on a day-to-day basis. So the third part around it is how do we manage the outflow of stress? How do we get it to come into our body, process, and then flow out? And that's what this is over here. This is the stress release valve. A tap that we're able to turn on that allows this stress that's coming in to flow through and out without accumulating, without overflowing, without causing that injury, illness, and disease that we see from overburden and an overload of stress. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about all the tools, techniques, practices that we use to be able to manage stress. Things like meditation, things like deep breathing, things like quality nutrition, relationships, etc. All of these tools and tactics that we can use to better manage that stress and allow it to flow through and out of the system. So what we're looking at here is a 3-part approach. And the reason why people often struggle with managing stress is they're missing one particular component of that 3-part strategy. They're either not managing the inflows or the inputs that are coming in, they're getting too much stress coming into the system, or the wrong types of stress, which are detrimental. They're not working on fortifying the container, i.e. making themselves more resilient and more sturdy to managing that stress. And they've got a faulty, shoddy bucket that's got holes in it everywhere, or it's maybe falling over. Or they don't have this tap turned on consistently to allow the stress to flow through the system. they've got a faulty tap that they can't turn on, the faucet might be broken, it's not working correctly, therefore they get this build-up of stress, overflow equals injury, illness, and disease. So there you have an insight and a snapshot into a framework that we can use to simplify the way that we're managing stress, which effectively comes down to the three things I mentioned. Managing the inputs, fortifying the container to make it more resilient, and creating as many outlets as we possibly can to allow the stress to flow through and out of. And one final word on that, in terms of these outputs, what we need to bear in mind here is that often people will identify things that relieve their stress, but in fact, they're actually adding more stress to the system. Let me give you a quick example. A lot of people, particularly people that enjoy socializing and going out, would identify things like having a night out with their friends as something that's relaxing, that's de-stressing, that allows them to de-stress. However, what you need to bear in mind is the number one question around whether it's an outlet is the net result of that activity adding more stress or taking more stress away? So in the example of going out and having a big night, yes, from an emotional, mental perspective, it may relieve you of some of that tension and stress, but it may add in significant stress in terms of chemical stress, in terms of physical stress, or in terms of psychic, mental, emotional stress even itself. So when you're looking at what these outlets are, the question is, does it take more stress away than it adds in? And if it doesn't, it's not an outlet. It can't be identified as something that's turning the tap on, and it can't be identified as something that's a genuine, proactive, effective stress management tool. So there you go. A snapshot, an insight into some of the stuff, just a glimpse of what I teach people in my Total Performance Principles program. Being able to manage stress, a fundamental aspect of the lifestyle pillar, one of three key areas that we look at in that pillar, which is part of an overall framework, a system of living that allows people to walk away with a holistic set of principles to create the health, well-being, and performance in their life.